All right, Steve, it was number one last week. And if it was voted on, ranked in a silo, that's certainly enough based on what happened to Michigan against Michigan State to keep them number one. But there are other teams involved. And I got to say, I dropped them from 1 to 2 myself. So your thoughts about the ranking?
Well, I've had Ohio State number 3 all along in my top 10 or top 25 that are top 16, whatever it is that I do for the football writers. And my basic feeling was we've watched Michigan dominate opponents all season long. And that's why I had them number 2. And then Georgia, 26, 27, however many games in a row it is. It's kind of the old adage, you got to be the man to beat the man. And, they've had some up and down games, certainly. But the last 2 weeks to do what they've done to beat Missouri and to beat Ole Miss in the fashion that they did, I think that's been impressive enough, I think, for committee members to look at it and rationally say, I think that the resumes now compare very favorably with Georgia and Ohio State, and Georgia moves up to number 1. The rankings are really not, the end all be all that important, other than it's going to determine, 1 plays 4, which might be a lesser opponent than 2 having to play 3. 3 might be a better team than 4, but it should be, although I don't think there's a lot that separates these 4 teams that will eventually play for the national championship in the playoff. But to me, just getting into the playoff is all that matters. Somebody on my chat this week was like, well, should they have left the players in the second half to impress the committee? I'm like, well, if you got 2 or 3 of those players banged up and they couldn't play against Michigan and you lose to Michigan because of it, then you missed the playoff because you lost to Michigan. So no, in answer, it doesn't matter. They could beat Minnesota 17-3 this week. And as long as they beat Michigan 3-2 the next week, they're going to the playoffs. So that's all that really matters, is winning the games, and not really how you look at it, because there can't be any more than 4 undefeated teams. So they're not going to pull you out in favor of another undefeated team if you win but don't look very good here down the stretch. So you're in if you win is basically it. And I don't necessarily see a scenario where they can lose to Michigan and still get in at 11-1 like they did last year. That seems kind of far-fetched. So, and I have no doubt whoever gets to Indianapolis would beat Iowa and go on. But at any rate, that's my thought. No big deal. Georgia probably deserves it, and win your games, and none of it matters.
I was led to believe that we started fresh every week. So this belief of however many games Georgia's won in a row shouldn't really matter, should it? Because it's a clean sheet every week, as we're told, or not. I expected Ohio State to come in at 2 this week. I was not surprised, but that was largely based on just year to year how the stuff works. And I know Tony's got an interesting factoid he will share, so I will not tread on that land. But I will say that as for Michigan, its schedule did get a little bit better, having played Penn State, a shared win that Ohio State has as well. So honestly, Michigan winning bum fights out there the rest of its season does nothing for me whatsoever in terms of putting any validity into where it should be ranked after 2 weeks of being told that resume matters. So we can cross them off the board. As for Georgia, yeah, Georgia beat Ole Miss badly. I mean, they took their soul and then did awful things with the soul. I mean, it was an ugly game. Kudos to them. I think that Ole Miss is somewhat of a legitimate team. I'm still not sold on Missouri. I don't care what Missouri did to Tennessee. I think Tennessee is a fraud. Any team that's having to put its hopes and dreams on the big arm of Joe Milton gets what it deserves. But I agree with Steve in the fact that it's highly unlikely that the loser of the Ohio State-Michigan game gets into the playoff. And I will say Michigan has a 0% chance based on its resume if it loses to Ohio State to get in that role. And Ohio State has a decimal chance. I mean, less than 1%. It's going to take a lot of chaos to get them there. So let's not try and figure out the side door, the back door to get into the playoff. If you're rooting for Ohio State, just win your games. But we're starting to see some of the engineering of the rankings to prop up the teams that they want to prop up, and it will only get worse as we go on, where we start seeing teams coming in 23 who are there to solidify another quote unquote good win for somebody. But beside that, I will yield the rest of my time to the senator from Northwest Ohio. That's you, Tony.
No, yeah, I'm sorry. So dropping from 1 to 2 is what I kind of expected. I think we all expected that. And I remember Ohio State being dropped in 2019 at the end after beating Wisconsin in the Big Ten championship game. So I went back and looked to see how many times has a team dropped in the CFP rankings from number 1 to number 2 after a win. It's happened 4 times now since 2014. 3 of those times have happened to Ohio State. 2 of those times, I forgot about the first time in 2019 when Ohio State dropped from 1 to 2 after beating Maryland 73-14. And that was the same week that LSU beat number 3 Alabama 46-41. So LSU jumped Ohio State. And then a week or 2 after that, Ohio State jumped back up to number 1 after a 28-17 win over number 8 Penn State. LSU beat like a 3-6 Ole Miss by 3 touchdowns. So Ohio State retook the number 1 spot there, and then of course lost it in the championship weekend. So 3 of the 4 times that the number 1 team has lost for a win, Ohio State has been that person, that team that has dropped. And so I tweeted that out. And what I should have done is just mention at the top that this is just information, because it's just presented as information. But I've got a lot of emotional Michigan fans in my mentions telling me to cry. And again, these aren't feelings. This isn't anything other than information. And then I see a bunch of other people getting emotional about it. I don't have, honestly, the dropping Michigan or dropping Ohio State after winning the Big Ten, I had a little bit of a problem with because of all of the situation going on there. But like this one was expected, but I just thought it was interesting. I think it is interesting that 3 of the 4 times it's happened, it's been to Ohio State.
Well, I got to say, Kevin, and all of us here, I, in theory, do the same thing. I reconstruct the top 25 or reconstruct whoever I'm considering, 44 teams, 62 teams, whatever it is. But let's be practical about it. That's what I would like to do in theory, but for a couple thousand views, I'm not sitting here for 17 hours reconstructing the entire season. So hopefully they've got the resources to truly follow through on that, because I believe that's the best way to do it, is to kind of clear the mind, clear the deck, reconstruct the season, because you've got beyond theory, you've got all these data points that change by the week. They're not the same data points that they were last week or 5 weeks ago. So they need to be reevaluated every week. So if they are doing due diligence, yes, reconstructing the season.
And that's what Boo Corrigan said last night. The first thing he talked about when moving Georgia ahead of Ohio State was the win over Missouri, which was weeks ago. That's what that was one of the key things for them. And because Missouri continues to play well and do better. And so that was one of the key factors for them in that decision.
And then other than that, we have no idea how these other teams were evaluated. And I'm not complaining in any such way that the rest of it held down to the Ole Miss spot and wherever they dropped 4 or 5 places, and Missouri jumping in there at, I believe, 9. The rest of it stood pat. Now, the committee can always lean later on 3 and 4 were razor close. We forgot to tell you that. Or, there was this enormous gap between 5 and 6 or whatever it is. They've done that in the past. And so they reserve the right to explain the levels of the rankings and the proximity between each ranking spot later when they need to. But as it stands, there's been no on the surface change in their evaluation of these teams across the board.
Well, there's no point, in my opinion, of having weekly rankings in November or whatever. They're going to do whatever the heck it is they want to do. We've seen that. It's helped Ohio State. It's hurt Ohio State. It's all there. But at the end of the day, they're going to do whatever it is they want to do. And they can, because they're the decision makers, and B, they're starting with a clean sheet. So they can just sit there and say, well, according to this clean sheet that we started, we see it this way. And it has nothing to do with the previous 4 or 5 weeks of polls that we have fed to you and made you watch basketball games to get to and everything else. It just seems real contrived, and maybe I'm just kind of beat down by this year or something like that, but I'm not having as much fun with these shows as the playoff shows that they're putting up on ESPN as I did before. I mean, maybe I've just been to the fair so many times and seen the broken down bear so many times that I'm not into it, but I'm extra jaded this year.
I can fall in line with that as well. I used to watch the thing, and now I just do my own watch party. And so I don't hear anything that's said because I can't have that copyright go out. So I just see the numbers and the teams and the logos pop up on the screen. And I always think, yeah, I'll go back and watch that. No, don't go back and watch it. Have no desire to go back and watch it.
Well, and you can't hold them accountable for something they say one week when they change their mind the next week. And like there's no way you can punish anybody for a lie one week or whatever. And it's just, it is what it is. Generally, they get it right in some form or fashion with the 4 teams. And I think they'll be able to get it right with 12 teams, because if we're complaining about 11 and 12 next year, which we will, but just be happy that you got the first 10 right, I guess, is what I would say.
Well, when we get to 12 teams, my thought on that is, will there be a legitimate argument that A, B, and C, team A, B, and C had an argument that they should have been number 12 or number 11 if 12 is the group of 5 team? Yeah, there will be legitimate arguments, and I have no issue with that, and I'll join in those arguments. But do they have the right to whine and complain about missing the playoffs? No, they had ample opportunity to be a better football team with better results.
Well, we'll also have a lot of seeding arguments. I mean, obviously, whatever it comes to be with the demise of the Pac-12, property of Oregon State and Washington State as of this moment, pending appeal, whatever becomes of that spot. I mean, you're going to have, your conference, highest rated conference champions, and however that sorts in. But as you're going to be having first round games and so on, there will still be wild conspiracies, some of them founded, a lot of them unfounded, about how that's being engineered and everything else. But I would rather get into that in terms of, okay, well, all these teams are included. Now we're going into the minutia rather than 5 conferences, 4 slots, everything else that's going on there. And certainly with many years of having 2 representatives out of 1 conference, including the Big Ten, this year shapes up to be a pretty wild year where you could really have some interesting decisions with a couple of 1-loss champions, and even potentially an undefeated champion in Florida State, who I'm not sure where its resume really would stack up to some of these other teams. And we know losses aren't necessarily losses when we're talking about the CFP committee.
While we squabble over 1 and 2, Jordan Kapler wrestles with this. Would you rather fight 100 gopher-sized Kevins or 1 Kevin-sized gopher? That's way beyond me.
I'd fight the Kevin-sized gopher, because 100 gopher-sized Kevins would have 100 hearts of champions, and you would get pummeled that way. But just a dumb gopher, I mean, just happens to be big and a little overweight, and I could take that dumb animal, but 100 gopher sized me's, forget about it. They would work well together, and they would take you down to Pound Town.
Then I definitely don't want that.
Can we choose to not even consider either? Could we possibly choose
That's not
that
how
route?
Jordan Kapler's super chats work.
I choose not to fight.
You're gonna have to take your own life then.
All right. Well, Steve, Michigan State didn't put up much of a fight on Saturday. Did that tell us anything about Ohio State? Because I think the Buckeyes played a near perfect game, or at least a near perfect first half or so, until they chose not to, completely humiliate their opponent.
You would expect it. I don't think I'm muted, am I?
You're good.
Okay. I don't think that I think that went about the way that you would expect it to go. I think that obviously Michigan State was kind of just playing out the string, and that was kind of borne out with how they had played, against Michigan, although they had beaten Nebraska the week before, but that's proving to not be that big of a feat, to be quite honest. So to me, I look at it that they wanted to go in and have a fast start, which they did. They wanted to be in control of the game at the half, which they were, and they wanted to get the key players out of harm's way by middle of the third quarter, which they did. Like Travion Henderson was done at halftime. I didn't see this, but I guess Emeka Egbuka may have gotten injured, maybe being out there a little bit longer than he probably could have or should have, but they're trying to get him back into the flow. It's like you walk this thin line of getting guys ready and getting guys into the flow and everything else, and also having them, re-injure themselves and different things or hurt themselves. And so I thought the balance was almost perfect last week. And I'm looking for a carbon copy again this week against Minnesota. You got another team that's just kind of there. They're 5-5, trying to get to a bowl game. This is the outside chance of all outside chances. If they win twice, which I think is Ohio State and Wisconsin, and Iowa loses twice to Illinois and Nebraska, they would tie, and Minnesota would go to the Big Ten championship. If it's just a two-way tie, they would go to the Big Ten championship game because they have the tiebreaker. But that seems like such an outside chance that would possibly happen. So to me, this is about Ohio State, just as like last week against Michigan State was all about Ohio State. Yes, Michigan State did run the ball effectively the first two series, but Ohio State made a couple adjustments, got that taken care of. Michigan State never took a snap inside the Ohio State 34-yard line. That's pretty impressive. Let's see, at halftime, Kyle McCord was 21 of 25 for well over 200 yards. And I know that 3 of the incompletions, one of them was after a bad snap where the play was kind of screwed up. One of them, he was under pressure and threw it away. And one of them was Marvin Harrison, just nobody around, just straight dropped the pass, which is, an anomaly in and of itself. I don't remember the fourth one, but that'll tell you just what kind of a half Kyle McCord, who's been Ohio State fans' favorite whipping boy all season, he played his best half of football, in my opinion. So, again, against Michigan State, which is playing freshmen out there in some key positions, and it doesn't look good right now for Michigan State. But Ohio State put its best foot forward, I thought.
Yeah, don't look now. Kyle McCord, the number 12 rated passer in the nation, number 12 in yards per attempt. And that dude had some protection in the first half against Michigan State and took advantage of it. He said, Ryan Day said they had spent a lot of time during the week since the last game working on his footwork, just keeping it solid, pointed in the right direction. And you saw the results of that. You saw the accuracy that he was throwing with the touchdown pass downfield to Marvin Harrison, dropped it in like CJ Stroud has done 50 times in his career. And that's the Kyle McCord that people have been hoping to see, and they saw it. And if he can continue that, then this team can beat anybody, and especially if they're going to protect him. Now, Michigan State is a bad team with a bad pass defense and bad rush defense and all of that, but it's still good to see this from Ohio State start to reach its potential. And I asked Ryan Day and I asked Jim Knowles yesterday as well, is this team, is the offense playing its best ball? You want to be playing your best ball in November. Are they doing that? And he said they were. And you're still adding pieces. You're still getting healthier. Emeka Ibuka, Day said they held him out from the set for the second half. As Steve said, he did get a little banged up, walked off. Didn't seem to be getting any much extra work or checking on the ankle or whatever. But the more he is back, the more they can use him and devise things for him. But I also really, really like what they're doing with Xavier Johnson in the 21 personnel and the 2-back sets, using him to run, using him to lead block for a play action wheel route, which is probably one of my favorite plays of the year. That was the pass that they threw down the sideline to Xavier Johnson. There are some things that they can do with that, and they'll continue to do things with that just to supplement Travion Henderson and figure out a way to get by the loss of Mayan Williams and also not have to play Dallin Hayden, although you're getting to the point where Dallin Hayden can start to play a couple of games. I wouldn't be surprised if he's playing against Michigan if they need him to. So I like what they're doing with the offense. Cade Stover getting back. They've got a ton of weapons right now. And if a defense wants to go ahead and bracket Marv, you can. But as we saw, Michigan State tried it in the third quarter, and he ran right by both guys. So good luck with that. And then it's up to Kyle McCord to just be patient and take the other options, which he seems comfortable doing.
Of all the games of football that I watched, that Michigan State game was one of them. That's about all I can say. I went into that game with zero care. I'm going into Minnesota with zero care. Interesting factoid. I know I'm kind of advancing the story here. According to Pick Six Previews, top 5 defenses in Power 5, opponent adjusted per play. Minnesota, out of 69 Division One FBS Power 5 teams, Minnesota is 63rd, even better than Michigan State at 50. And I know that you can't necessarily look at those rankings and say, because of that, Ohio State's on par to score 20% more points over 38. But you know, we're in the silly season before Michigan. Get through, take care of your business, rest your starters, and be spending that time getting ready for the game that really matters at this point. Ohio State went out, was able to score 35 in the first half. Looked like it was in position maybe to get an early touchdown in the third quarter. Kyle threw over the middle to Emeka, who was double covered on post, and it didn't work out. But I don't really have a ton of concerns about where Ohio State is outside of special teams largely. I did find something interesting that I didn't even notice during the game on the offensive line, where they had pulled Carson Hinsman out just to bring Matt Jones over to center, put Enoch Vamahi at guard, just to try out a different group. Ryan Day was asked about it on Tuesday, said, we're just doing some things, but didn't give any indication that's something we're going to see moving forward. But it does certainly give Matt Jones some real game experience at center if they find that they're having a hard time with their normal configuration against Michigan here upcoming.